The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Clarence House as Camilla, Queen Consort of England, prepared for what she thought would be an ordinary day. She stood by the window of her private sitting room, watching the guards change their posts below. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her morning tea, a nervous habit she had never quite managed to shake even after years of royal life. Outside, her car waited. It was a modest vehicle by royal standards, a dark blue sedan that she preferred for personal errands. Today she had planned a quiet visit to a charity in Kent, away from the usual pomp and ceremony. She wanted simplicity, normalcy, even if just for a few hours, as she descended the marble staircase. Her private secretary hurried alongside her, clutching a folder of papers. "Your Majesty, the schedule has been confirmed. You'll arrive at 11:30, meet with the directors, tour the facilities, and return by tea time." Camilla nodded absently. Her mind was elsewhere, drifting to memories of the late Queen Elizabeth. It had been months since her passing, yet the weight of that loss still pressed heavily on Camilla's heart. The Queen had been more than a mother-in-law. She had been a guide, a steady presence in the storm of royal duties and public scrutiny. The driver opened the car door. Camilla slid into the back seat. The leather was cool against her skin. As the vehicle pulled away from Clarence House, she watched London pass by through tinted windows. Pedestrians hurried along sidewalks. Tourists snapped photos of landmarks. Life continuing its relentless march forward, but something felt wrong. Camilla couldn't quite place it, but there was an unsettling sensation in her chest. She had learned to trust these instincts over the years. Royal life had taught her that danger often wore a pleasant face, that threats could hide behind smiles and ceremony. The car merged onto the motorway, and Camilla tried to relax. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through messages from her children. Responses to charity correspondence, the endless digital demands of modern royalty. Yet that nagging feeling persisted. Meanwhile, back at Clarence House, Senior Royal Guard Thomas Whitmore was conducting his routine security check. Thomas had served the royal family for 15 years, a career defined by precision and unwavering loyalty. He was a tall man, with graying temples and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Today's inspection should have been straightforward. Walk the perimeter, check the vehicles, ensure all security protocols were maintained. But when Thomas reached Camilla's car in the secure garage, something caught his attention. The trunk appeared slightly ajar. It was barely noticeable. Just a fraction of an inch, but to Thomas's trained eye, it stood out like a beacon. No royal vehicle should ever be left unsecured, not even by a millimeter. His pulse quickened. This could be a security breach, a bomb, anything. He immediately radioed for backup. Within seconds, 3 more guards arrived. Along with Detective Inspector Sarah Chen from the Metropolitan Police's Royalty Protection Unit, Sarah was a woman in her early 40s. Known for her calm demeanor and sharp investigative instincts. "What do we have?" she asked, her voice steady. Thomas pointed to the trunk. "It's not properly closed. Protocol requires immediate inspection." Sarah nodded and pulled on a pair of gloves. The other guards formed a perimeter, hands ready at their weapons. The garage suddenly felt very small, very tense. "On my count," Sarah said. 3, 2, 1. She lifted the trunk lid. For a moment, nobody moved. They had expected many things. A suspicious package, evidence of tampering, perhaps nothing at all. But what lay before them was something none could have anticipated. Inside the trunk, nestled among emergency supplies and a spare tire, was an old leather case. It was weathered, the kind of vintage luggage that spoke of another era. Gold initials were embossed on the front. E.R. Elizabeth Regina, the late Queen's personal mark. Sarah's breath caught. Nobody touches anything else. "We need to secure this scene immediately." Thomas stared at the case, his mind racing. How did the late Queen's belongings end up in Camilla's car trunk? Had they been there all along? Was this some kind of oversight, or something more deliberate? "Should we open it?" one of the younger guards asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah shook her head. "Not yet. This needs to be documented. We need witnesses, proper protocol." If this case belongs to the late Queen, its contents could be of significant importance. She pulled out her phone and made a call. This is Detective Inspector Chen. I need to speak with the king immediately. It's urgent. We found something at Clarence House that requires his immediate attention. Within the hour, King Charles arrived, his face grave. He had been in meetings at Buckingham Palace when the call came through. Now he stood in the garage, staring at the case that bore his mother's initials. Are you certain this wasn't catalogued during the estate proceedings? He asked quietly. Sarah shook her head. We're checking records now, Your Majesty, but it appears this case was never part of the official inventory. Charles reached out, his fingers hovering above the leather but not quite touching. His mother had been meticulous about her possessions, about everything really. The idea that something of hers had gone missing, only to turn up months later in his wife's vehicle, was deeply unsettling. We should inform Camilla, he said finally. She's en route to Kent, Thomas replied. Should we recall her? Charles considered this. His first instinct was to protect his wife from yet another media storm, another scandal. But this was too important to handle carelessly. Bring her back. Quietly, no sirens or fuss. Tell her there's been a scheduling change. And for God's sake, keep this absolutely confidential until we understand what we're dealing with. As the call went out to Camilla's security detail, the small group in the garage continued to stare at the mysterious case. Whatever secrets it held, they were about to change everything. The question now was whether those secrets would bring comfort or chaos to a family still grieving their matriarch. The trunk lid remained open, the case waiting like a time capsule from the past. In the dim light of the garage, the gold initials seemed to glow with an almost otherworldly significance. E.R. Elizabeth Regina, the Queen who had reigned for 70 years, whose life had been an open book to the world, or so everyone had thought. Thomas glanced at his watch. Camilla would be back within the hour, and then, finally, they would discover what the late Queen had hidden away, and why it had ended up in the most unexpected place imaginable. Camilla's phone rang just as her car passed through the outskirts of London. The screen displayed her private secretary's number, which was unusual during a journey. She answered with a slight frown. Your Majesty, I'm afraid there's been a change of plans, the voice on the other end said carefully. We need you to return to Clarence House immediately. What's happened? Camilla asked, her heart beginning to race. Is Charles all right? The children? Everyone is perfectly well, came the measured response. But there's a matter that requires your urgent attention. I'm not at liberty to discuss it over the phone. The vagueness of the explanation only heightened Camilla's anxiety. In royal circles, such carefully chosen words usually meant trouble. She instructed her driver to turn around, and the car made a smooth U-turn at the next junction. The journey back felt longer than the drive out had been. Camilla's mind spun with possibilities. A security threat? A family emergency? Some new scandal brewing in the relentless tabloid machine? She had weathered so many storms over the years. But the uncertainty never became easier to bear. When they finally pulled through the gates of Clarence House, Camilla noticed immediately that something was different. Extra security personnel stood at attention. Several unmarked police vehicles were parked discreetly near the service entrance. Her stomach tightened. Charles himself was waiting for her in the entrance hall, which was unprecedented. He usually remained at his own residence or office, unless the situation was truly serious. What's going on? Camilla asked as she stepped out of the car, not bothering with formalities. Charles took her hand, his expression difficult to read. Come with me. There's something you need to see. He led her not to the usual sitting rooms, but down to the secure garage beneath the building. Camilla's confusion grew with each step. When they entered the garage, she saw a small group gathered around her car, guards, a police detective. Several officials she didn't immediately recognize. Someone please explain what this is about, Camilla said, her voice firmer now. Masking her nervousness with the authority she had learned to project, Detective Inspector Sarah Chen stepped forward. Your Majesty, during a routine security inspection this morning, we discovered that your vehicle's trunk was not properly secured. Upon investigation, we found this. She gestured to the open trunk, where the old leather case lay visible, the golden ER initials catching the overhead lights. Camilla stared at it, uncomprehending. I don't understand. What is that? We believe it belonged to the late Queen, Charles said quietly. We were hoping you might be able to explain how it came to be in your vehicle. Implication hung in the air, and Camilla felt a flash of indignation. Are you suggesting I put it there? Charles, I've never seen that case before in my life. Nobody is accusing you of anything, Sarah interjected quickly. But we do need to understand the chain of custody. When was the last time you personally accessed your trunk? Camilla thought hard. I honestly can't remember. Weeks ago, perhaps? I rarely use this car for anything other than local visits, and the staff handles loading any supplies or gifts. Anyone could have placed that case there without my knowledge. Thomas Whitmore spoke up. Your Majesty, our security logs show that this vehicle has been in the secured garage continuously for the past month, except for your trips. Access to this area is strictly controlled. Then someone with access put it there, Camilla said, her voice rising slightly. This is absurd. Why would I take something belonging to the Queen and hide it in my own car? Charles placed a calming hand on her shoulder. Nobody thinks you did this deliberately, darling. But we need to understand what's inside that case and how it got here. Then open it, Camilla said, gesturing toward the trunk. Let's end this mystery right now. Sarah looked at Charles, who nodded his consent. She reached into the trunk and carefully lifted the case out. Setting it on a nearby table that had been brought down for examination, the leather was soft with age. The brass clasps tarnished but functional. Everyone leaned in as Sarah undid the clasps with gloved hands. The lid lifted with a soft creak. Inside, wrapped in layers of silk cloth, was a collection that made everyone in the room catch their breath. Diamonds. Not just any diamonds, but pieces that even the untrained eye could recognize as extraordinary. There were necklaces with stones the size of acorns, bracelets that shimmered with inner fire, brooches set in platinum and gold. Each piece was wrapped individually, protected and preserved with obvious care. My God, Charles whispered. Sarah carefully lifted one of the necklaces, holding it up to the light. The central stone was a brilliant cut diamond of at least 50 carats, surrounded by smaller stones in an intricate Victorian setting. I know this piece, Charles said, his voice thick with emotion. My mother wore it to my wedding. It was one of Queen Victoria's favorites, part of the personal collection, not the crown jewels. He reached for another piece, a delicate tiara. And this? She wore this on her 21st birthday. I've seen it in photographs. Camilla stood frozen, staring at the glittering array. But why? Why would these be hidden in a case in my car? This doesn't make sense. Sarah began carefully documenting each piece, taking photographs and notes. As she worked, she noticed something else at the bottom of the case. A sealed envelope, cream-colored and heavy, with writing on the front in an elegant flowing script. There's a letter, she announced. Charles reached for it immediately, recognizing his mother's handwriting. The envelope was addressed simply, to be opened in the event of discovery. His hand shook slightly as he broke the seal. Inside were several pages of the Queen's personal stationery covered in her distinctive hand. Charles began to read aloud, his voice barely steady. My dearest ones, if you are reading this, then circumstances have led you to discover what I hoped might remain hidden, at least for a while longer. What you have found represents more than mere jewels. These pieces are my insurance, my protection, and perhaps my greatest burden. The room was absolutely silent except for Charles's voice. Over the years of my reign, I learned that trust is the most precious and dangerous thing a monarch can give. I also learned that even in the highest circles, there are those who would use royal treasures for purposes that have nothing to do with duty or honor. These pieces were marked for sale by the Royal Collection Trust to be auctioned to private collectors. But I could not allow it. Camilla's eyes widened. She stole them. The Queen stole from her own collection. Charles continued reading. I did not steal what was already mine by right and by history, but I removed them from circulation because I discovered they were to be sold not to fund charities or maintain estates. but to pay debts of a more personal and scandalous nature. Debts incurred by someone very close to the family, someone whose betrayal cut deeper than I care to admit. Who? Thomas asked, then immediately apologized for interrupting. Charles shook his head, reading further. I will not name names here. Those responsible know who they are, and they know what they did. I removed these pieces to protect not just their value, but to protect the family from the scandal that would have erupted had the truth emerged. The jewels you see before you were meant to be my safety net. Proof of the deception, should it ever be needed? The letter went on to detail how the Queen had carefully removed the pieces over several months, replacing them with replicas so skilled that the theft went unnoticed. She had planned to eventually return them or make arrangements in her will, but death had come more suddenly than anticipated. Why Camilla's car? Sarah asked. That's the part I still don't understand. Charles flipped to the final page. I have hidden these in a place where they will be safe until the right moment reveals itself. Trust that when they are found, it will be by someone who can be trusted to do the right thing. He looked up at Camilla, his eyes glistening. She must have had someone place them there, someone she trusted. Perhaps she knew that eventually a security check would find them, and it would come to light in a controlled way. But who would she have trusted with such a task? Camilla wondered aloud. The question hung in the air like smoke. Who had the late Queen trusted enough to hide stolen diamonds, jewels worth millions, in Camilla's car? The answer would reveal not just a name, but potentially expose the scandal the Queen had worked so hard to prevent. Detective Inspector Sarah Chen was already thinking like an investigator. We need to check the security footage from the garage. If someone placed this case in the vehicle, there will be a record. Thomas Whitmore's face had gone pale. The footage archives only go back 3 months. After that, they're deleted to save storage space. If this case was placed more than 3 months ago, we have no visual record. Then we start with staff interviews, Sarah said decisively. Every person with garage access needs to be questioned. Discreetly, of course. Charles folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Before we begin interrogating loyal servants, we need to consider who the Queen mentions in this letter. Someone close to the family, someone whose debts would have caused a scandal. Camilla had been quiet, processing everything. Now she spoke, her voice thoughtful. Charles, you know your family better than anyone. In the years before the Queen's death, were there any financial troubles? Any whispers of gambling, bad investments, anything that might require a sudden influx of cash? Charles's jaw tightened. He looked around at the assembled group. Everyone in this room must take a vow of absolute secrecy. What we discuss here cannot leave these walls. The reputation of the monarchy depends on it. Everyone nodded solemnly. Sarah made a note that any official report would need to be heavily redacted. My mother was troubled in her final years, Charles began slowly. Not by her own affairs, which were always impeccably managed, but by someone else's. She confided in me once, just once, that she was concerned about certain expenditures that seemed excessive and unexplained. Who? Camilla asked gently. Charles hesitated. The weight of family loyalty warred with the need for truth. She never named names directly, but she mentioned that someone had developed expensive tastes that their allowance couldn't support. There were trips to Monaco, large purchases from exclusive jewelers, properties acquired through complex financial arrangements. Thomas cleared his throat. Your Majesty, with respect, there are several family members whose lifestyles match that description. Yes, Charles agreed, which is precisely why we need to be careful. An accusation without proof would tear the family apart. Sarah examined the jewelry again, her detective's mind working. These pieces were marked for sale by the Royal Collection Trust. There would be records of who authorized the sale, who would have benefited from the proceeds. The trust's records are sealed, Charles said. Accessing them would require special authorization. You're the king, Camilla pointed out. Surely you have that authority? Charles nodded slowly. I do. But opening those records could be like opening Pandora's box. Are we prepared for what we might find? Before anyone could answer, Charles's private secretary appeared at the garage entrance. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but the Duke of Edinburgh is here. He says it's urgent, and he must speak with you immediately." Charles and Camilla exchanged glances. Prince Edward, the late Queen's youngest son, rarely made unannounced visits, especially ones marked as urgent. "Send him down," Charles said after a moment's consideration. Edward appeared minutes later, his face flushed as if he'd been hurrying. He was a slender man in his late 50s, usually composed and measured. Today he looked agitated. "Charles, thank God. I heard there was some kind of security incident involving Camilla's car." His eyes fell on the open case, the scattered jewelry, and the color drained from his face. "Oh, no, Edward." Charles stepped toward his brother. "What do you know about this?" Edward's hands trembled as he reached out to steady himself against the car. "I didn't know where she'd hidden them. Mother told me she'd found a safe place, but she never said where. I thought perhaps a bank vault, or maybe given to a trusted advisor." The garage had gone completely silent. Everyone stared at Edward. "You knew about this?" Camilla asked, her voice sharp. "You knew the Queen had taken these jewels?" Edward nodded miserably. "She asked for my help. About a year before she died, she discovered that money from the Royal Collection Trust was being siphoned off. Not the pieces themselves initially, but funds that should have gone to preservation and maintenance. She traced it back to sale authorizations for several items, including these. Who authorized the sales?" Sarah asked, her notebook ready. Edward's face crumpled. "Sophie? My wife, Sophie?" The revelation hit like a physical blow. The Duchess of Edinburgh, beloved by the public, known for her charity work and steady presence at royal events, implicated in financial scandal. "That's impossible," Charles said. "Sophie doesn't have access to make those kinds of decisions. She does if she forges signatures," Edward said quietly. "And she's quite skilled at it. Mother discovered it by accident when reviewing documents. The handwriting looked almost exactly like hers, but there were tiny discrepancies." Camilla sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed. Why would Sophie do such a thing? Edward sat heavily beside her. Debt. Massive debt from investments that went wrong. She'd been advised by a friend to put money into a development project, assured it was a sure thing. It wasn't. She lost over £2 million. Money she couldn't explain missing because it came from her personal accounts, which are monitored. So she started selling royal jewelry to cover her losses. Sarah's tone was incredulous. "Not selling directly," Edward explained. "She would authorize sales through the trust, but ensure the pieces went to a specific dealer who would then sell them privately. She'd get a cut of the proceeds under the table. It was sophisticated, well hidden." Charles felt sick. And Mother discovered this? She confronted Sophie privately. Mother gave her a choice. Confess everything and face the consequences, or stop immediately and work to repay what was taken. Sophie chose the latter, but Mother didn't trust her completely. So she took these pieces, the most valuable ones that Sophie had marked for her next sale, and hid them away. As evidence, Sarah concluded, and as a way to prevent further theft. Edward nodded. Mother told me she'd hidden them somewhere safe, somewhere they'd eventually be found, but in a controlled manner. She said when the time was right, the truth would come out, and we'd have the proof we needed. Why didn't she just expose Sophie immediately? Camilla asked, "Why go through all this?" "Because Sophie is my wife," Edward said, his voice breaking. "Because any scandal would destroy not just her, but me, our children, the entire family. Mother was trying to protect us all while also ensuring justice would eventually be served. She hoped Sophie would voluntarily confess and make amends, but Sophie just kept denying everything. Kept promising she'd repay the money through legitimate means." Charles paced the garage, his mind reeling. His mother had carried this burden alone, protecting her family, even as one of them betrayed her trust. "Where is Sophie now?" he asked. "At home, I think." "She doesn't know I've come here. She doesn't know about any of this." Sarah closed her notebook. "With respect, Your Majesty, this has moved beyond family matters. Fraud against the royal collection is a serious crime. We need to bring in the appropriate authorities." "Not yet," Charles said firmly. "Not until we have all the facts." Edward, I need you to go home and act as if nothing has happened. Can you do that? Edward nodded reluctantly. What are you going to do? What mother would have wanted, Charles replied. We're going to handle this with dignity, with proof, and with the family's best interests at heart. But make no mistake, Sophie will answer for what she's done. After Edward left, the small group remaining in the garage looked at each other with exhausted expressions. The mystery had been solved, but the scandal it revealed was worse than anyone had imagined. The Queen was brilliant, Camilla said softly, looking at the jewels. She created a time bomb, one that would only explode when the right people were there to handle it properly. Charles picked up his mother's letter again, reading the final lines. She ends by saying, I trust those who find this will do what is right, not what is easy. The monarchy survives not by hiding our flaws, but by addressing them with grace and justice. He looked at the diamonds, catching the light like frozen fire. His mother's last gift to him wasn't just the jewels themselves, but the burden of truth and the responsibility to handle it wisely. The rest of that day passed in a blur of quiet conversations and careful planning. Charles retreated to his private study with Sarah Chen and a select group of trusted advisors. The diamonds had been moved to a secure vault, cataloged and photographed. Each piece represented not just monetary value, but a thread in a web of deception that had operated right, under the nose of the world's most scrutinized family. Camilla found herself walking through the gardens of Clarence House as evening fell. The discovery had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. She had spent years trying to earn her place in the royal family, fighting against public perception, working to prove she deserved to stand beside Charles. And now, to find herself unwittingly caught in the middle of a scandal involving the late Queen's jewels felt like some cruel twist of fate. A figure appeared on the path ahead. Princess Anne, the late Queen's only daughter, approached with her characteristic brisk stride. Even in casual clothes, she carried herself with military precision. I heard about the excitement, Anne said without preamble. Charles called me. Quite the discovery. That's one word for it, Camilla replied. I'm still trying to process everything. Anne fell into step beside her. Mother always had a plan. Even when it seemed like chaos, she was 10 steps ahead. She chose your car deliberately, you know. Did she? Camilla stopped walking. How can you be sure? Because I helped her, Anne said simply. The admission hung in the cool evening air. Camilla stared at the Princess Royal, who met her gaze steadily. You put the case in my trunk? 6 months before Mother died, Anne confirmed. She was already ill, though we didn't know how little time she had left. She asked me to do it because she knew no one would question my presence in the secure garage. I had access codes, clearance. It took me less than 5 minutes, but why my car? Camilla asked again, the question that had been gnawing at her all day. Anne began walking again, and Camilla followed. Mother told me that when the case was eventually found, it needed to be discovered in a way that would bring the right people together. Not just Charles, but you, the security team, investigators. She wanted it found during a routine check. Something that couldn't be hushed up or explained away by family members trying to protect Sophie. She was very calculating, Camilla observed. Not entirely comfortable with the idea, she was a realist, and corrected. Mother knew that if she simply confronted Sophie through official channels, the scandal would explode immediately. But if she removed the evidence and waited, Sophie might eventually confess on her own, or the situation would resolve itself in a less damaging way. Did she really believe Sophie would confess? Anne's expression hardened. Mother always wanted to see the best in people, even when they'd disappointed her. With Sophie, I think she hoped that given enough time and the weight of guilt, a confession might come. Obviously, that didn't happen. They reached a secluded bench and sat down. The lights of London were beginning to twinkle in the distance as dusk settled over the city. What happens now? Camilla asked. That depends on Charles and on you, Anne replied. The easy path would be to return the jewels quietly, claim they were misplaced during estate cataloging, and sweep Sophie's crimes under the royal carpet. The harder path is to pursue justice, even if it means airing family secrets. What would your mother have wanted? Anne was quiet for a long moment. Mother believed in duty above all else. Duty to the crown, duty to the country, duty to the truth. She also believed in protecting the institution of monarchy. Sometimes those duties conflict. Back in Charles's study, a different conversation was unfolding. Sarah Chen had brought in Anthony Whitehall, the director of the Royal Collection Trust, a scholarly man in his 60s who looked devastated as he reviewed the evidence of Sophie's fraud. "I cannot believe this was happening under my supervision," Whitehall said, his hands shaking as he examined the forged authorization documents. "These signatures are nearly perfect. I never thought to question them." "That's because you trusted the Duchess," Charles said, not unkindly, "as we all did." "How much was stolen in total?" Sarah asked. Whitehall consulted his tablet where he'd been cross-referencing records. "If these documents are genuine forgeries, and the pieces listed here were all part of the scheme, we're looking at approximately £7.3 million worth of jewelry and artifacts sold over a 2-year period." The number made everyone in the room pause. £7 million was not just a scandal, it was a catastrophe. "The trust is publicly funded in part," Whitehall continued. "This will need to be reported to Parliament if it becomes public. There will be inquiries, investigations, questions about oversight and accountability. Can Sophie repay that amount?" Sarah asked. Charles shook his head. "Not without selling everything she owns, and even then I doubt it would be enough. Edward's finances are separate from hers, and while he's comfortable, he doesn't have access to that kind of liquid capital." "Then prosecution is inevitable," Sarah concluded. "Even if you wanted to handle this privately, the amounts involved make it a matter of public interest." A knock at the door interrupted them. Charles's secretary entered, looking uncomfortable. "Your Majesty, the Duchess of Edinburgh, is here. She's demanding to see you immediately. She says she knows why her husband was called here earlier." Charles and Sarah exchanged glances. "Send her in," Charles said after a moment. Sophie entered with the bearing of someone preparing for battle. She was an attractive woman in her late 50s, always impeccably dressed and groomed. Today, though, there were dark circles under her eyes and her makeup couldn't quite hide the pallor of her skin. "Where is Edward?" she demanded without preamble. "He went home hours ago," Charles replied calmly. "I'm surprised you didn't encounter him there." "I wasn't home. I was at an engagement in Surrey." Sophie's eyes darted around the room, taking in the assembled group. "What is this? Some kind of tribunal?" "Sit down, Sophie," Charles said, his voice carrying the weight of royal command. She sat, but her posture remained defiant. "I don't know what Edward told you, but whatever it is, it's protecting me from something that's been blown completely out of proportion." Sarah opened a folder and slid several documents across the desk. "Are these your signatures, Your Royal Highness?" Sophie glanced at them, and Charles saw the moment recognition flickered across her face. Her carefully maintained composure cracked just slightly. "I sign dozens of documents every week. I can't possibly remember each one." "These are authorizations for the sale of royal jewelry," Sarah continued. "Pieces worth millions. The signatures appear to be the late Queen's, but forensic analysis shows they're forgeries. Very skilled forgeries." "That's absurd. Why would I forge anything?" Charles leaned forward. "Mother knew, Sophie. Before she died, she knew everything. She left us proof, evidence, her own written account of what you did." The defiance in Sophie's expression finally crumbled. Her shoulders sagged and tears began to streak down her cheeks. "I never meant for it to go so far," she whispered. "It started with just one piece, a small brooch that nobody would miss. I was going to pay it back immediately." "But you didn't," Charles said. "You kept taking more, selling more, covering your tracks with increasingly elaborate forgeries." Sophie buried her face in her hands. "I was desperate. The debts kept growing. The people I owed money to weren't the kind you could negotiate with. They threatened me, threatened my children. I didn't know what else to do." "You could have come to us," Charles said, though his voice held more sadness than anger. "You could have asked for help and admit I'd been such a fool, that I'd gambled away millions on bad investments." Sophie looked up, her face blotchy with tears. How could I face the Queen with that? How could I face any of you? Sarah's expression remained professional, but there was a hint of sympathy in her voice. Your Royal Highness, I need to inform you that what you've just admitted constitutes multiple criminal offenses. Fraud, forgery, theft of national treasures. You have the right to legal representation. Sophie laughed bitterly. National treasures. Do you know how many national treasures are locked away in vaults? Never seen? Never appreciated? I told myself I was just redistributing wealth that was sitting idle. Idle. You were stealing, Charles said flatly. From the nation, from the family, from your own mother-in-law who trusted you. The Queen who welcomed you into this family and gave you a position of responsibility. The words hit Sophie like physical blows. She doubled over, sobbing now in earnest. I know. God help me, I know what I've done. I've been living with the guilt every single day. When the Queen confronted me, I swore I'd stop, swore I'd find a way to make it right. But the damage was already done. Did you know she'd hidden the diamonds? Sarah asked. Sophie shook her head. I knew some pieces had gone missing from the inventory. I thought maybe she'd moved them for security reasons, or that someone else had discovered what I was doing. I was terrified every day that the truth would come out. Charles stood and walked to the window, his back to the room. Outside, the evening had fully settled, and London glittered in the darkness. The Queen gave you a chance, he said quietly. She could have exposed you immediately had you arrested, destroyed your life. Instead, she chose to protect you. Protect Edward, protect your children. She chose to believe you'd do the right thing eventually. I tried, Sophie said desperately. I've been working with financial advisors, trying to build up enough money to start repaying what I took. But £7 million? It would have taken me decades, maybe my entire lifetime. The Queen understood that. Charles turned back to face her. That's why she left the evidence hidden, but accessible. She knew that eventually the truth would have to come out. But she wanted to give you time to find your own redemption first. Sophie wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue. What happens now? Sarah closed her folder. That depends on several factors. The amount stolen, your cooperation with the investigation, your willingness to make restitution, and frankly, how the family wishes to proceed. I want to turn myself in, Sophie said suddenly, her voice stronger. I'm tired of hiding, tired of lying. If I'm going to face consequences, I'd rather face them with whatever dignity I have left. Charles studied his sister-in-law for a long moment. She looked broken, defeated, but there was something genuine in her expression now. Perhaps it was relief that the charade was finally over. We need to consider the implications carefully, Whitehall interjected. A public prosecution would damage the monarchy's reputation significantly. The press would have a field day. The press always has a field day, Charles replied. That's not a reason to avoid justice. Soft knock interrupted them, and Camilla entered with Anne. Both women took in the scene, Sophie's tear-stained face. The tense atmosphere, the scattered documents. I think Sophie should hear what Mother really thought, Anne said without preamble. She looked at Charles. May I? Charles nodded and Anne pulled out her phone. Mother sent me a voice message 2 weeks before she died. I've kept it private until now, but I think this is the moment she was preparing for. She pressed play, and suddenly the late Queen's voice filled the room. It was slightly weak, the effects of her illness evident, but still unmistakably her. Anne, my darling, if you're playing this, then the diamonds have been found and the truth is coming out. I want you to make sure Sophie hears this message. Sophie's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock and fresh tears. The Queen's voice continued. Sophie, I know you're listening. I want you to understand that I never hated you for what you did. I was disappointed, heartbroken even, but not hateful. You made terrible choices driven by fear and pride, but you're not a terrible person. I've watched you with your children, seen the charity work you do, witnessed the genuine kindness you show to others. Your mistakes don't define you entirely. Sophie's sobbing intensified, but she remained silent, listening. However, kindness and understanding don't negate consequences. What you did was wrong, and it cannot simply be forgotten. but I want you to know that I've made provisions in my private estate to help with restitution. There are funds set aside not to excuse your actions, but to help repair the damage and allow you to move forward with your life." Everyone in the room looked surprised by this revelation. Charles had known nothing about such provisions. "The path forward won't be easy," the Queen's message continued. "You'll need to face public scrutiny, accept punishment, and work to rebuild trust that may never fully return. But you have a choice in how you face this. You can face it with honesty and grace, or you can continue to hide and let the shame consume you. I pray you choose the former. The monarchy has survived far worse scandals than this. What matters is how we respond when our flaws are exposed. Do we make excuses, or do we accept responsibility and try to be better?" There was a pause, and when the Queen spoke again, her voice was softer, more personal. "Edward loves you, Sophie. Your children love you. Don't let pride rob you of the chance to maintain those relationships. They will stand by you if you give them the truth. Hiding in shame only isolates you from the people who matter most." The message ended with a soft click. The room remained silent for several long moments. Sophie finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "She recorded that for me. Even knowing what I'd done, she took the time to record that message." "That was Mother Anne," said simply. "She never gave up on people, even when they'd given up on themselves." Trell sat down heavily. His mother continued to surprise him, continued to teach him lessons, even from beyond the grave. She had thought of everything, planned for every contingency. "The Queen set aside funds for restitution?" Whitehall asked. "How much?" "I'll need to check with her private solicitors," Charles replied. "But knowing Mother, it would be enough to make a significant difference. Though not enough to completely erase Sophie's responsibility." Sarah made a note. "This changes things. If partial restitution can be made immediately, and if the Duchess is willing to cooperate fully with the investigation, we might be able to negotiate a resolution that serves justice without completely destroying the family." "I'll cooperate with everything," Sophie said quickly. "I'll testify, provide documentation, explain exactly how I did what I did, so the trust can prevent it from happening again. I'll accept whatever punishment is deemed appropriate." "Even if that includes prison time?" Sarah asked directly. Sophie hesitated, then nodded. "Even then, I deserve it. What I did was criminal, and I should face criminal consequences." Camilla spoke for the first time since entering. The Queen's message talked about grace and honesty. "I think we need to find a way to honor both those principles." Charles looked at his wife gratefully. She had a way of cutting through complexity to find the heart of an issue. "Here's what I propose," he said, standing with renewed purpose. "Sophie, you will make a full confession to the appropriate authorities. You will cooperate completely with their investigation. The family will not interfere with the legal process, whatever that entails." Sophie nodded, accepting each point. "However," Charles continued, "we will also be honest with the public about the Queen's role in this. Not to excuse your actions, but to show that even in the midst of betrayal, she chose compassion and gave you the opportunity for redemption. That story matters too." "The press will crucify me," Sophie said quietly. "Yes, they will," and agreed bluntly. "But they would crucify you anyway. At least this way, you face them with honesty, rather than being exposed as a liar and a thief caught in the act." "When?" Sophie asked. "Tomorrow," Charles decided. "We'll prepare a statement tonight. You'll meet with investigators in the morning and by afternoon. We'll release the news on our terms rather than waiting for it to leak." Sarah stood. "I'll begin coordinating with the Crown Prosecution Service. This is going to be complicated, but if everyone cooperates, we can manage it." As the meeting began to break up, Sophie approached Charles. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not just throwing me to the wolves immediately." "Don't thank me yet," Charles replied. "The road ahead is going to be incredibly difficult. But Mother believed you could walk it with dignity, and I'm choosing to believe that too." The next morning dawned gray and cold over London. Matching the somber mood at Clarence House, Sophie had spent the night in a guest room, unable to face returning home to Edward until after her confession had been made official. She sat now in a formal receiving room, flanked by two lawyers Charles had insisted she accept. Waiting for the investigators to arrive, Camilla found her there, staring out the window at nothing in particular. The Duchess of Edinburgh looked like she'd aged a decade overnight. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore no makeup. For the first time since Camilla had known her, Sophie looked genuinely vulnerable. "May I sit?" Camilla asked softly. Sophie gestured to the chair beside her without speaking. They sat in silence for a moment, before Camilla spoke. "I know we've never been particularly close. The family dynamics, the history, it's always been complicated between us. You don't need to pretend we're friends now," Sophie said, her voice flat. "I know what people think of me. The social climber who married into the family, who never quite fit in properly." "I wasn't going to say that," Camilla replied. "I was going to say that I understand what it's like to feel like you don't belong. To feel like every mistake you make is magnified 1,000 times because of who you married. I know what it's like to be afraid of losing everything." Sophie finally looked at her, really looked at her. There was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, an acknowledgement of shared experience. "How did you survive it?" Sophie asked. "The press, the judgment, the feeling that you'd never be good enough." Camilla thought carefully before answering. "I stopped trying to be what everyone wanted me to be and started focusing on being who I actually am. I made mistakes, plenty of them, but I owned them. And I learned that the people who matter, the ones who truly know you, will stand by you, even when you fail." "Edward hasn't spoken to me since yesterday," Sophie admitted. "He came home late, went straight to his study, and locked the door. This morning he was gone before I woke up. He's processing," Camilla said. "This isn't just your betrayal of the Queen. It's a betrayal of him, too. He'll need time. I don't know if he'll forgive me. He might not. Not completely. Not for a long time." Camilla's honesty was painful, but necessary. "But he's a good man, and good men don't abandon their wives when things get hard. He'll be angry, disappointed, hurt, but he'll also remember why he married you in the first place." Before Sophie could respond, Sarah Chen arrived with 2 other investigators and a court stenographer. It was time. The confession took 3 hours. Sophie detailed everything, the initial investment that went wrong, her panic when she realized how much money she'd lost, her first tentative forgery of the Queen's signature. The escalation, as one theft necessitated another to cover her tracks. She named the dealer who had helped her, provided account numbers where the money had been transferred, explained her entire methodology. The investigators listened impassively, recording every word. Occasionally they asked clarifying questions, but mostly they let Sophie talk. By the end, she looked completely drained, hollow. "That's everything," she said finally. "Every piece I took, every document I forged, every lie I told. I have records at home, bank statements, correspondence with the dealer. I'll provide all of it." Sarah nodded. "Thank you for your cooperation, Your Royal Highness. The Crown Prosecution Service will review this statement and determine how to proceed. Given the amounts involved and the nature of the crimes, I must inform you that you should expect formal charges to be filed within the week." "I understand," Sophie said quietly. After the investigators left, Charles gathered the family in his private sitting room. Edward had finally returned, his face haggard. He sat as far from Sophie as possible, unable to look at her. Anne was there, along with Camilla. And Charles's sons William and Harry had been briefed and were joining via video call. "We need to present a united front," Charles began. "The statement we release this afternoon will set the tone for everything that follows. The press will be vicious, but we control the narrative if we're honest and direct." William's face appeared on the screen, serious and thoughtful. "What's the statement going to say?" Charles pulled up a document on his tablet and began reading. "The royal family announces, with deep regret, that an investigation has uncovered financial irregularities involving the Royal Collection Trust. The Duchess of Edinburgh has admitted to unauthorized sale of collection items over a 2-year period. The late Queen Elizabeth was aware of these activities before her death and took steps to preserve evidence while giving the Duchess opportunity to make amends. The Duchess is cooperating fully with law enforcement. The royal family respects the legal process and will not seek to interfere with the investigation or prosecution. The room was silent as everyone absorbed the carefully worded statement. It was honest without being sensational, acknowledged the Queen's role without making her seem naive, and made clear that Sophie would face real consequences. "It's good," Anne said finally. "Direct and dignified. Mother would approve." Edward spoke for the first time. "It makes Sophie sound like a common criminal." "She is a criminal," Anne replied sharply. "She committed crimes." "We can't sugarcoat that, Edward." "She's still my wife," Edward said, his voice breaking. "She's the mother of my children. How am I supposed to protect them from this?" Charles moved to sit beside his youngest brother. "You protect them by being honest. By showing them that even when someone we love makes terrible mistakes, we don't pretend it didn't happen. We face it, we deal with the consequences, and we try to move forward." "I don't know if I can do this," Edward admitted. "Stand by her through a trial. Watch her be destroyed in the press. Pretend everything is fine when our entire life has been built on lies." Sophie, who had been silent until now, stood abruptly. "You don't have to stand by me, Edward. I've never expected you to. File for divorce, distance yourself and the children from me. I'll understand." "Is that what you want?" Edward asked, finally looking at her. "What I want doesn't matter anymore," Sophie said, tears streaming down her face. "I destroyed that right when I started stealing from your mother. I destroyed our marriage the moment I chose to lie to you every single day for 2 years. The raw emotion in the room was palpable. Camilla felt her own eyes burning with tears. Whatever else Sophie was, she was a woman watching her entire life crumble around her. Edward stood and walked toward his wife. For a moment it seemed like he might embrace her. Instead, he stopped a few feet away. "I need time," he said. "Time to process this, to figure out what I feel. But I'm not abandoning you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I just need time." Sophie nodded, unable to speak. The statement was released at 3 o'clock that afternoon. Within minutes, every news outlet in the world was running with the story. Royal scandal. Duchess admits theft. Queen's diamonds stolen by family member. Edinburgh Duchess faces criminal charges. The family had prepared for the onslaught, but the reality was still overwhelming. Camilla watched the news coverage from her private sitting room, Charles beside her, calling her the greatest royal thief since the crown jewels were nearly stolen in 1671, Camilla observed. "Historically inaccurate," Charles muttered. "But when has accuracy ever mattered to tabloids?" His phone buzzed constantly with calls from government officials, friends, distant relatives, all wanting information or offering support or, in some cases, barely concealed glee at the scandal. "The Prime Minister wants to meet tomorrow," Charles said, reading a message. "Parliament is going to have questions about security at the royal collection." "Let them ask," Camilla said. "Whitehall is already implementing new protocols. This will actually make the collection more secure in the long run." "Trust you to find the silver lining," Charles said with a tired smile. That evening, against the advice of her lawyers and family, Sophie gave a brief statement to the press gathered outside Clarence House. She appeared alone. "Without Edward dressed in a simple black suit, I want to address the British people directly," she began, her voice steady despite her obvious nerves. "What has been reported today is true. I stole from the royal collection. I forged documents. I betrayed the trust placed in me by the late Queen and by this family. There are no excuses for what I did, only explanations. And even those don't justify my actions." The reporters were completely silent, their cameras flashing constantly. "I made a series of terrible financial decisions that led to massive debt. Instead of asking for help, I chose deception. I told myself I would pay everything back, that no one would ever know, that the ends justified the means. I was wrong about all of it." Sophie paused, visibly gathering her strength to continue. "The late Queen knew what I had done. She confronted me with grace and gave me the opportunity to make things right. I failed her. I continued to lie, continued to hope I could fix things on my own. Her Majesty's final act regarding this matter was to ensure that the truth would eventually come out, but in a way that would give me every possible chance at redemption." A tear rolled down Sophie's cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. "I am cooperating fully with the investigation. I will accept whatever punishment is determined to be appropriate. I ask only that my children and my husband be allowed their privacy as they deal with the consequences of my actions. They are innocent in all of this. The blame rests entirely with me." She turned and walked back inside without taking questions, leaving the press corps buzzing with excitement. It was unprecedented for a royal family member to address such a scandal, so directly and personally. 3 months had passed since Sophie's public confession, and the world had watched as the scandal unfolded with all the drama of a period thriller. The trial had been swift by legal standards, though every day felt like an eternity for those involved. Sophie had pleaded guilty to all charges, which expedited the process considerably. The courtroom had been packed with journalists, royal watchers, and curious members of the public who had managed to secure seats through the lottery system. Sophie sat in the dock wearing a navy suit, her hands folded in her lap. Her expression composed but pale. The prosecution had laid out the evidence, methodically. £7 million worth of jewelry and artifacts sold through fraudulent authorizations. The forged signatures, the secret bank accounts, the elaborate cover-up. They presented it all with clinical precision, but then came the defense. And this was where the late Queen's wisdom truly revealed itself. Sophie's barrister presented the voice message the Queen had recorded, playing it for the entire courtroom. The effect was extraordinary. Here was the victim herself, speaking from beyond the grave, not demanding vengeance, but offering understanding and a path toward redemption. The barrister also presented evidence of the Queen's private fund, which she had indeed set aside for restitution. £3 million, carefully invested and managed by her personal solicitors, specifically designated to help repair the damage Sophie had caused. The late Queen understood something profound, the barrister argued. She understood that justice and mercy are not opposing forces, but complementary ones. Her Majesty could have destroyed the defendant immediately, but instead, she chose to create an opportunity for genuine repentance and restoration. The prosecutor objected, arguing that the Queen's compassion didn't negate the severity of the crimes. The judge agreed. But it was clear that the Queen's message had affected everyone in the courtroom. Character witnesses were called. Representatives from the charities Sophie had worked with testified about her genuine dedication to helping others. Her children submitted written statements describing a mother who had made catastrophic mistakes, but who had always loved them and tried to teach them right from wrong, Edward testified. And his appearance was perhaps the most difficult moment of the entire trial. He sat in the witness box looking years older than he had just months before. "Do you believe your wife is genuinely remorseful?" the prosecutor asked. "Yes," Edward replied without hesitation. "I believe she's been living in a private hell since the moment she made her first mistake. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it is the truth. Has your relationship survived this revelation?" Edward's jaw tightened. "We're separated currently. I needed space to process everything. But we're in counseling, trying to understand how we got here and whether we can find a way forward." "Do you want to find a way forward?" "I'm still deciding," Edward admitted honestly. "Some days I think I can forgive her. Other days I can't even look at her without feeling betrayed all over again. Marriage is complicated, and this situation is more complicated than most. When it came time for sentencing, the judge delivered a lengthy statement that was reported worldwide. "The defendant has committed serious crimes against a national institution," the judge began. "The theft of millions of pounds worth of historical artifacts is not merely a property crime. It is a betrayal of public trust and cultural heritage. Normally, such crimes would warrant a substantial custodial sentence." Sophie stood to hear her fate, her hands trembling despite her efforts to remain composed. However, the judge continued, "This case presents unusual circumstances. The victim herself, Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth, chose a path of measured response rather than immediate prosecution. She created an opportunity for redemption while ensuring accountability. This court is mindful of those wishes." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Furthermore, the defendant's immediate and complete confession, her full cooperation with authorities, and her evident remorse are significant mitigating factors. The partial restitution made possible by the late Queen's provisions demonstrates an unusual level of foresight and compassion. The judge looked directly at Sophie. "Make no mistake, Your Royal Highness. What you did was wrong. You have brought shame upon yourself and your family. You have damaged public confidence in institutions that rely on trust and integrity. These are not small matters." Sophie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Therefore I sentence you to 3 years imprisonment, suspended for 5 years. You will be required to complete 500 hours of community service, specifically in programs related to financial literacy and addiction recovery. You will be subject to a tenure, banned from holding any position of financial authority within the royal collection or any related institution. Additionally, you will continue working to make full restitution of the remaining £4 million through whatever legitimate means are available to you." The courtroom erupted in whispers. A suspended sentence meant Sophie wouldn't actually go to prison unless she violated the terms of her probation. It was lenient by some standards, but the conditions were strict and the public humiliation was complete. "I want to be clear," the judge added, raising her voice over the noise. "This sentence reflects the unique circumstances of this case, including the wishes of the victim. It should not be interpreted as suggesting that theft from public institutions will be treated lightly in future cases. The defendant's cooperation, remorse, and the restorative measures put in place by the late Queen are factors unlikely to be replicated." After the sentencing, Sophie was led from the courtroom through a side entrance to avoid the media scrum, but that evening she held one final press conference, this time with Edward standing beside her. "I am grateful for the court's mercy," Sophie said, reading from a prepared statement. "I don't deserve it, but I am grateful nonetheless. I understand that many people will be angry about the sentence, will feel that I should have received harsher punishment. I can't argue with that." She looked up from her paper, speaking more freely now. "What I can promise is that I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. Not just financial amends, though I will work tirelessly to repay every penny, but amends to the public trust, to my family, to the memory of a woman who showed me more grace than I had any right to expect." Edward stepped forward to the microphone. "Sophie and I are working on our marriage. I won't pretend it's easy or that everything is resolved. But the late Queen taught me something important through all of this. She taught me that holding on to anger and resentment only poisons the person doing the holding. I'm choosing to try forgiveness, not for Sophie's sake, but for my own." The questions from reporters came fast and furious, but Edward and Sophie answered them with remarkable patience and honesty. Yes, their children were struggling but receiving support. No, Sophie would not be resuming her royal duties. Yes, they understood the public's anger and disappointment. Watching from Clarence House, Camilla felt an unexpected wave of admiration for both of them. It would have been easier to hide, to release statements through lawyers and spokespeople. Instead, they were facing everything head-on. "Mother would be pleased," Charles said quietly beside her. "Not pleased with what Sophie did, but pleased with how everyone is handling the aftermath." "Your mother was playing chess, while the rest of us were playing checkers," Camilla observed. "She orchestrated all of this, from hiding the diamonds, to leaving that voice message, to setting up the restitution fund. She knew exactly how it would all unfold." "Almost exactly," Charles corrected. "I don't think she anticipated how moved the public would be by her gesture. The polls are quite remarkable, and indeed they were. Public opinion had shifted dramatically over the course of the trial. Initial anger at Sophie had gradually been tempered by respect for the late Queen's handling of the situation. Many people saw it as a final lesson from a woman who had spent 70 years teaching the nation about grace under pressure. A week after the trial concluded, Charles made an unexpected decision. He invited Sophie to a private meeting at Clarence House, with only Camilla present. Sophie arrived looking nervous, clearly unsure what to expect. She had barely been out in public since the sentencing, still adjusting to the terms of her probation and the community service requirements. "Thank you for coming," Charles said, gesturing for her to sit. "I wanted to speak with you away from lawyers and press and all the noise." "Of course, Your Majesty," Sophie replied formally. Charles smiled slightly at the title. We're family, Sophie. Complicated, damaged family, perhaps, but family nonetheless. I'm not asking you to call me Charles necessarily, but I don't want this to be a formal audience. Sophie relaxed slightly. All right. What did you want to discuss? The diamonds, Charles said. The ones Mother hid. I've been thinking about what to do with them. They should go back to the collection, obviously, Sophie said quietly. They belong to the nation. Some of them do, Charles agreed. But not all. Several pieces were actually from Mother's personal collection, not the crown jewels or official collection. She had the right to do with them as she pleased. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside was one of the brooches, a delicate piece featuring a central diamond surrounded by smaller sapphires. This was one of Mother's favorites. She wore it on her first official tour with my father. It's back in 1952. It's appeared in hundreds of photographs over the years. Sophie stared at it, confused. Why are you showing me this? Because I'm giving it to you, Charles said simply. Sophie's eyes widened in shock. You can't be serious. After everything I've done, you want to give me one of the Queen's personal pieces? Not want exactly, Charles clarified. But it's what Mother would have wanted. I found another letter among her papers, sealed and marked to be opened after the trial concluded. She left instructions about several of the personal pieces. This brooch was to go to you. Camilla handed Sophie the letter, and Sophie read it with shaking hands. The Queen's elegant script was unmistakable. Sophie, if you are reading this, then you have faced the consequences of your actions with whatever courage you could muster. I hope the journey has taught you something about honesty, about the weight of our choices, about the possibility of redemption. This brooch has been with me through many difficult moments. I wore it when I was young and uncertain, when I faced criticism and doubt. I want you to have it now, as you begin the long process of rebuilding your life and reputation. Not as a gift you've earned, but as a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we can find the strength to continue. Wear it when you need courage. Remember that I believed in your capacity to be better than your worst mistakes. Sophie's tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink slightly. I don't deserve this, Charles agreed gently. But grace isn't about what we deserve. It's about what we're given, in spite of what we deserve. Mother understood that better than anyone. The meeting ended with Sophie clutching the small box, overwhelmed by the gesture. As she left, Camilla turned to Charles. That was incredibly generous, she said. Not everyone will understand it. I'm not sure I completely understand it myself, Charles admitted. But Mother's instructions were clear. She wanted Sophie to have something tangible to remind her that redemption is possible. 6 months later, the story had largely faded from the daily headlines, though it remained part of the royal family's complex history. Sophie was working at a community center, teaching financial literacy classes as part of her community service. She wore the Queen's brooch pinned to her jacket every day. Edward had moved back home, and though their relationship remained strained, they were working through their issues with the help of counselors and time. Their children had struggled initially, but were slowly accepting that people could make terrible mistakes and still be worthy of love. The diamonds that belonged to the royal collection had been returned and were now on display in a special exhibition about the late Queen's life and legacy. The exhibition included information about the theft and recovery, presented honestly but without sensationalism. The public response had been overwhelmingly positive. People appreciated the honesty, the acknowledgement that even royal families dealt with betrayal and difficult choices. Camilla stood in the exhibition one quiet morning before it opened to the public. She looked at the diamonds behind their protective glass, thinking about the strange journey that had brought them back. Still processing it all? Anne asked, appearing beside her. Always, Camilla replied. Your mother created something remarkable here. She turned a crime into a lesson, a scandal into an opportunity for grace. She had a gift for that, and agreed, taking impossible situations and finding the thread that could lead to something better. They stood together in comfortable silence. Two women who had both struggled to find their place in the royal family. Both beneficiaries of the late Queen's complicated wisdom. Do you think Sophie will really change? Camilla asked. Anne considered the question. I think she already has. Whether that change sticks, whether she can maintain it for the rest of her life, that's the real question. But Mother gave her the tools. What Sophie does with them is up to her and the monarchy. Camilla wondered. How do we recover from this? By doing exactly what we're doing, Anne said firmly. By being honest. By facing our flaws. By trying to do better. The crown has survived far worse than one family member's criminal stupidity. We'll survive this too. As they left the exhibition, Camilla thought about the car trunk that had started everything. Such an ordinary space to hide such extraordinary secrets. But perhaps that was fitting. The royal family, for all its pageantry and grandeur, is ultimately composed of ordinary people trying to navigate extraordinary circumstances. The late queen had understood that. She had understood that diamonds, for all their brilliance, were just stones. What mattered was how people treated each other in moments of crisis. Did they choose vengeance or compassion? Did they hide their mistakes or face them? Did they give up on people who failed, or did they give them room to try again? The answers to those questions, more than any jewel or crown, were what defined a legacy. And Queen Elizabeth's legacy, Camilla realized, would include this strange, complicated story of theft and redemption, of diamonds hidden in car trunks, and grace extended from beyond the grave. It was messy and human and imperfect. It was, in other words, exactly right.